Well, I get why he's back, but how is he back? Hello everyone, Tharries here, and welcome back to another video where today I want to talk a little bit about how David Tennant is playing the 14th Doctor, because I've seen a lot of people talking about the reasons why he's playing the 14th Doctor, how it could affect the show going forward outside of the narrative, but what I wanted to talk about is how this could happen within the narrative, because we only really have two pieces of precedent for this sort of thing to occur. The one of which being, ironically enough, the Met Crisis Doctor, again with the 10th Doctor, where he uses a hand as a biometric receptacle to basically turn into himself once again, and then the only other piece of evidence for a degeneration of sorts to directly happen is the one line from the curator in the 50th anniversary, who is implied to be a future incarnation, saying, in years to come you might find yourself revisiting a few, but just the old favourites, eh? But that's some pretty light evidence for this occurrence. You know, there's not really been a standout example in the modern series, or even in Classic Who in general, of just one Doctor turning back into another Doctor through regeneration. We've had multi-Doctor stories, but they are always shown to be different incarnations previous to whoever the current one is at the time. So I'm going to go over some of your theories as to how this could have happened. But before we get into it, if you could do me a teeny tiny little favour and click that subscribe button, it would be very much appreciated. We are trying to get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if we could get there, that would be ever so much appreciated. We're currently about 400 subscribers away from 17,000, which is the next big goal, so if you could help us get there, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, go follow me on Twitter if you want to, but of course you don't have to. But with that said, let's get into the video. So the first suggestion I wanted to highlight comes from Jude Pig and Tea Break. Perhaps the Toymaker degenerated 13 into Tennant so he could trigger Donna's memory of him and use that power somehow. No other incarnation would have worked. A lot of people have suggested the idea of the Toymaker somehow being involved in the regeneration, as we also see the clothes change with Tennant as well, which isn't really something that happens. I guess it technically happened from the first Doctor to the second Doctor, but that wasn't really done for any greater narrative purpose. That was more so just done because, well, budget constraints at the time, and they probably weren't sure how exactly the technicalities of regeneration worked. But that's the theory that I currently subscribe to, the idea that the Toymaker will have something to do with the degeneration, if you want to call it that. Where I think this theory gets interesting, though, is the idea that the Toymaker is specifically using the 10th Doctor in order to harness the power within Donna Noble, because as we all know, Donna Noble has no memory of the 10th Doctor due to the events of Journey's End, and in End of Time we see that her remembering even a small part of the Doctor causes her to explode with a massive amount of energy. So the idea of the Toymaker using that for some nefarious purpose, I think, is a really, really interesting one. There's a similar idea echoed with Furlough, but to a different end. I'm willing to wager NPH's Toymaker, Neil Patrick Harris's Toymaker, is basically acting like a kid with figures, recreating stories from another universe, the comics, so that would explain Beep the Meep and the Wraith Warriors, or what we assume to be Beep the Meep and the Wraith Warriors, who are villains from the comics, using faces he liked and companions he enjoyed, whilst trapping Ncuti's incarnation elsewhere, a metaphorical representation of stagnation. The mention of puppets and his general movements, as well as David Tennant and Donna being back, etc., all give me the vibe of RTD bringing it back for fun, but also to show that the show needs to move on past this stuff into the future. I hope so anyway. I completely agree with this idea. I've said before, I assume and I think that this whole narrative with these three Tennant specials, it's kind of going to be a meta-commentary on how the 10th Doctor is a great era, but we are like moving past it now. I would not be surprised if the 10th Doctor's final lines was something to the effect of, I'm ready to go, or I want to go, or something to that effect. Showing that not only is he ready to go, but for the audience, like, hey, the 10th Doctor was great, but we're moving on past that now. And I think the idea of the Toymaker basically using the Doctor as his puppet, that's something that even Russell T Davies said the 60th was going to involve, is puppets. I think that's a really cool idea, and I would love it if this was actually the narrative justification for Tennant's face. And then we got from Jessica saying, I believe the regeneration or degeneration was caused because of Jodie's being by the edge for so long, keeping the barrier open like in the Void in Series 2 finale, meaning 10 slipped through. He's a Doctor who never wanted to go. I wonder if he didn't pass through fully. Okay, so this is in reference to the recently released power of the Doctor. Essentially, in that episode, we are introduced to an area of the Doctor's subconscious, I believe, called the Edge, which is basically where incarnations pass through over to the next one. And there's a line from one of the Doctors that says, once you've passed that line, you can never come back, which is obviously kind of directly contradicted by the appearance of David Tennant at the end. So the idea of perhaps the Doctor sort of regeneration being in a state of, I guess, flux between obviously the Doctor and the Master, and then obviously whoever the next one was going to be, might have allowed Tennant to slip back in. I really like that idea quite a bit, because it fits with his idea of not wanting to go. My only reasoning for not really buying that they would do that is that I believe that the Centenary, or Power of the Doctor, was written before Chibnall had knowledge of what's going on in the 60th anniversary, which is why I think the idea of them tying in that heavily is a pretty unlikely prospect, but still not impossible, and I like the way it's explained here, that it's kind of a similar vein to like the Void in Series 2, how he's accidentally passed through once again, or maybe intentionally so. So this one kind of combines the ideas. So this is from Tom, who says, I think the fourth regenerations put 13 in a vulnerable state, making it possible for the Toymaker to hijack the regeneration. So this is kind of combining both, combining the idea that the forced regeneration into the Master sort of made 13's regeneration a bit wacky, so that then the Toymaker could then execute his plan to infiltrate it. To be fair, as much as I said before that the Centenary was written before Chibnall knew what had to the 60th, that doesn't necessarily mean that Russell couldn't put a line in linking the two events together. We of course know that Russell saw the Centenary multiple times before its broadcast and regularly talked about it in interviews. So the idea of him maybe saying, oh yeah, I had a bit of a wacky regeneration last time round, that's why maybe the Toymaker was able to co-opt it, I could totally see as a justification. And then we have this one from Brock and Who's Sean, which I personally really like. 13 said, I need more time in Power of the Doctor, so it could have affected the Doctor since 10 said something similar. I could do so much more, and then obviously I don't want to go as well. So maybe because they both share a lingering attachment to life. You know, the Pompeii event affected the Doctor's regeneration perhaps the same way, with some inversion of the Toymaker or whoever Neil Patrick Harris will play. I might add, it doesn't seem like a degeneration type thing, or maybe something about his past. 10th Doctor has gone wrong, and that face returned as a warning, but I don't know. Okay, so this is really interesting, because what they're referencing with the Pompeii event is that Caecilius from Fires of Pompeii was confirmed later on in the Capaldi era to be the inspiration behind 12's face. So we've seen before that Time Lords can exert some level of control over their faces based on previous experience. We also have that throwaway line during the War Doctor's regeneration of, I hope the ears are a bit less conspicuous this time, which is obviously a joke towards the fact that Christopher Eccleston had the most conspicuous ears of any incarnation. There's also the idea that I know many have posited that the 12 regeneration into 13 is a direct response to 12's plea to have fun, run fast, be kind, because 13 is arguably the most light and bubbly incarnation of the revived series. So, yeah, there's also that idea. But I really like the idea that because both of them kind of felt like they wanted more time, that could subconsciously, in the, the soul of the Doctor, recollect back to a time when they also wanted more time with David Tennant. That's an idea I really like. Also, the idea of the face being used as a warning I really like. Another idea I've seen, but I've not seen posited in this list, if you did suggest this, and I haven't seen it, I apologise, is the idea that maybe the Time Lords or some other higher entity could sort of force the Doctor back into this face as a punishment for some sort of mission. Kind of like what happened in the extended War Games stuff, where Charon was allowed to keep his face for a little bit longer in order to complete missions for the Time Lords. That's also a pretty cool idea, and maybe the mission itself could only be completed with that face. Maybe something to do with Donna or something like that. That could also be pretty cool. I also asked the YouTube what they had to say on the topic, and they gave an interesting comment. This is from Bitbap the Grunt. That blue regeneration energy from the 60th tease and the logo reveal has something to do with it. So yeah, what this is referring to is in the trailer for the 60th anniversary, as well as in the logo reveal, you not only have the weird regeneration normal yellow energy on the logo, but also this blue energy, which, if I can put a little theory out there, kind of looks similar to Artron energy. Now, the interesting thing about that is that we've seen Artron energy used as a direct way of basically swapping bodies. If you remember back to the Death of the Doctor, the Sarah Jane Adventures episode, the Artron energy that Clyde inhales in the previous Sarah Jane Adventures story allows the 11th Doctor to occupy his space in the unit base wherever he's staying when they all thought the Doctor had died. So maybe it's something to do with that. Maybe Artron energy has had something to do with basically the Doctor being able to transform into this previous self, because we know that that has effects on time. That's a pretty cool idea. And this final one from Rob Del Tony. I fully agree with your 60th anniversary that Neil Patrick Harris is behind the regeneration mess up. After all the clothes changed, something that happened in a regeneration story since the very first one, with William Hartnell's Patrick Troughton, I'm thinking it's part of the Toymaker's game, and we've entered in a false reality. Yeah, the idea of a false reality is something that I've mentioned a few times, because if you look back on the 60th anniversary filming, we know that all the posters seem to be weirdly out of sync, different dates, all that sort of thing. So I definitely think the reality that they're in is somewhat messed up by the Toymaker. We also see basically Armageddon going on all the while the Toymaker is dancing around it somewhat undetected, implying he has some control over the domain in which he inhabits. I think an interesting idea as well is that, as a few people have pointed out, the idea for the first regeneration before it was implemented in the 10th planet was going to be that the celestial Toymaker was going to play with the Doctor's face, or something to that degree, and then by the end of the story, the Doctor would come back, but played by a different actor. That's how they were originally going to incorporate regeneration, or at that point it would probably be called something else. So maybe they are doing a modern version of that using a legacy face. Maybe we will see the Doctor flicking back and forth Ncuti Gatwa and David Tennant. After all, we've seen Ncuti Gatwa in Tennant's costume before, so maybe it could be a case of them going back and forth between the two. I'm not sure. I definitely think the Toymaker has something to do with it though, but let me know in the comments below what you think the cause of David Tennant being back as the Doctor is. How do you think David Tennant is the 14th Doctor? Whatever your thoughts are, drop them down in the comments below. Let's talk about them. Like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.